Welcome to Her Remarkable History. Remember, to support our channel, please subscribe. The unburied husband of Mary Queen of Scots left to rot. One of the most captivating Tudor figures is Mary Queen of Scots, the Stuart monarch of Scotland who was forced off the throne in favour of her son James. She would try to take refuge in England as she feared for her life in her homeland, and she would then be held as a prisoner of her cousin Elizabeth I, the English Queen. Elizabeth would imprison Mary for almost 2 decades, and Mary would agree to take part in a number of plots to try and oust Elizabeth from the throne. But this caught up with the former Scottish monarch, who was then accused of treason and was found guilty inside the walls of Fotheringhay Castle, the very fortification, which would be the place where she lost her head. But Mary's love life was characterised by a number of tragic and terrible husbands, and her third and final husband was James Hepburn, the 4th Earl of Bothwell. He was a man who was at the centre of scandal, and was accused of being the man behind the murder of Mary's second husband. But Bothwell met a rather brutal end inside of a castle in Denmark, and his remains were disturbed a number of times over the years. James Hepburn was the son of Patrick Hepburn, the 3rd Earl of Bothwell, and Agnes Sinclair. He was given the title the Master of Bothwell from birth, and he then succeeded his father in the title as Earl at the age of 18. He rose to the position of Lord High Admiral of Scotland, and in this role he took part in a number of expeditions and voyages. In 1559 he sailed to Copenhagen, and whilst he was there, he fell in love with a woman known as Anna Trons, or Anne Tronson. Anna was a Norwegian noblewoman whose father was a prominent Norwegian admiral. The pair were engaged, and Anne left Norway with Bothwell. When they travelled to Flanders, James was destitute, and he asked his fiancée to sell all her valuables, and she then went back to Denmark to ask for more money. But eventually the relationship turned sour, and Anna would complain about the treatment she suffered at the hands of her husband. But then, in the February of 1566, Bothwell then married another woman, despite his previous engagement, and this lady was Lady Jean Gordon, the daughter of the 4th Earl of Huntly. But after just over a year of marriage, the couple would separate, and they were divorced after James was known for having a number of adulterous affairs with his wife's servants. But in the years before, James Hepburn, the Earl of Bothwell, had met Mary Queen of Scots a number of times. He met her when he visited the French court in the autumn of 1560, following leaving his first fiancée. And whilst there, he was well received by the Queen and her then husband, King Francis II. James would say, "The Queen recompensed me more liberally and honourably than I had deserved, and he was given 600 crowns and the post and wage of a gentleman of the French King's chamber." He went back to France a number of times, and following the death of Mary's French royal husband, Bothwell was involved in getting her back to Scotland and sorting out naval affairs relating to this. But he was a supporter of Mary of Guise, Mary's mother, and following her death and Mary Queen of Scots' return to court, Bothwell was just an ordinary player at court. But over the time, he would become more rebellious. He would openly challenge other Scottish lords who accused him of interfering with the crown and plotting against, and Bothwell was imprisoned inside of Edinburgh Castle in 1562. He would later manage to escape, but as time went on, Mary and Bothwell became very close. The Queen would attend his marriage to Lady Jean Gordon, but he sustained a serious wound and almost died in 1567. Hearing the news, Mary Queen of Scots rode to see him, and all through the hills and forests of the borders to be with him, despite only a few weeks earlier giving birth to a son. Some historians claim that this was coincidence, and that the two were not lovers at the time. However, one of the most sinister parts of Bothwell's life was his involvement in the murder of Mary's second husband, Lord Darnley. He was one of those who was accused of murdering Mary's consort, and Darnley's father and other members of the Privy Council swore vengeance against him. Darnley himself was an abusive and violent drunk of a husband. However, in the early hours of the 10th of February 1567, his body was found in a field. There had been 2 huge explosions, but Darnley's body was found away, smothered. Bothwell would later be acquitted, but it was now rumoured that he would marry Mary Queen of Scots. Bishops, earls and lords would sign a document demanding that Mary should then marry a Scottish subject, but on the 24th of April 1567, whilst the Queen was riding from Linlithgow Palace to Edinburgh, Bothwell appeared with 800 men. He told the Queen her life was in danger in the Scottish capital, and he took her to his castle at Dunbar. She went with him, and whilst inside his castle, the Queen was taken prisoner by James Hepburn, the Earl of Bothwell, and whilst there, Mary was subjected to a number of assaults by Bothwell. He wanted to secure marriage with her and the crown, and he was then made the Duke of Orkney and the Marquess of Fife, and the 2 were married on the 15th of May inside the Great Hall at Holyrood. The marriage was divisive, and it split the country in 2. Many opposed it, and a number supported, and there was a showdown between the 2 opposing sides at Carberry Hill on the 15th of June. However, after this, Bothwell then fled and ran away. He had one final embrace and hug with Mary Queen of Scots, but he would never be seen again by her. Months later, his estates and titles were forfeited, and Bothwell was now on the run. He knew he would be executed if he was caught by the wrong people, and he hopped from different castles to board a ship. He travelled to Shetland, but then was pursued by his enemies, and he fought a 3-hour-long sea battle, and during this, a storm forced him to sail towards Norway. It's believed Bothwell may have wanted to reach Denmark to raise an army to restore Mary to the throne again, with the support of the Danish king Frederick II. However, he was caught off the coast of Norway without proper papers, and he was then escorted to the port of Bergen. This was the home of Anna, the woman he was engaged to first, who raised a number of complaints against James Hepburn, and with this, Anna, who was backed by her wealthy and powerful family, tried to take him down. Bothwell was held in custody inside of Bergenhus fortress, whilst he was sued for abandonment and the return of Anna Tronson's dowry. He would have been released, but the king learnt that Bothwell was wanted for Lord Darnley's murder, and he was then taken to Denmark to be held in custody. James Hepburn was held in Copenhagen, and the king secured his fate. He was sent to the prison of Malmøhus Castle, before he was then transferred to Dragsholm Castle. Whilst inside of this castle, Bothwell was held under lock and key and was not allowed any time out at all. He was kept in solitary confinement and was subject to a very tough torture ordeal. He was chained constantly to a pillar which was half his height, and because of this, he could never stand up and had to spend all days hunched over or sat down. He was also held in the complete dark constantly. It was said that the pillar where he was chained to had a circular groove in the floor around it, as he was held there with little movement for so long that the floor began to erode away. All of this drove him completely insane and broke him, and 5 years after being first held inside of the castle this way, on the 14th of April 1578 he died, having gone mad from the imprisonment. But this was not the end for the remains and body of James Hepburn, the 4th Earl of Bothwell. He was buried inside a vault at Fotheringhay Church, close to the castle where he died. However, in 1858, the body was exhumed, and it was said to have been Bothwell's. His remains were found in a dried condition, and they weren't too decayed, and they were referred to as Bothwell's mummy. And following this, his descendants tried to return his body back to Scotland, but this was not granted. Over the years, his body was dug up and exhumed a number of times, and it was even displayed in an open casket and case at a museum in Copenhagen for thousands of people to see. But shockingly, in 1976, the Edinburgh Wax Museum would display one exhibition which wasn't wax, and they claimed that it was the body and mummified remains of James Hepburn, the 4th Earl of Bothwell. It was claimed that these were eventually brought back to Scotland, but this was not confirmed. However, what is shocking is the fact that the following closure of the museum, These remains, which could have been the husband of Mary Queen of Scots, have gone missing, and it's not known where they are today. A painting of his mummified head shows his remains in a state of decay, but with a full head of hair. Today, the whereabouts of one of the most intriguing Scottish figures of the 16th century are still missing and lost. James Hepburn, the 4th Earl of Bothwell, was a divisive and brutal figure who would force marriage to Mary Queen of Scots and would subject the Scottish Queen to a horrific ordeal of assault inside of his castles while she was held a prisoner. He was a schemer and a womanizer, and a man who was obsessed with power. But today the question still remains as, is his body still unburied, and where is it? Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.